Hello and welcome to IEEE Soft Robotics Podcast. In this podcast, we're going to interview researchers from both academia and industry about their work, thoughts, spectrum, and more beyond that. This is Marwa Edwini, and I hope you will find this podcast useful. If you would like to connect with us, simply send us, and we will be happy to hear from you. And here is my interview. Thanks.
Hello and welcome to IEEE Soft Robotics Podcast. Hello, Lieven. Thanks so much for joining us in the podcast. Such an honor to have you.
It's an honor to be here in a serious podcast about science and technology.
You're a comedian, so I don't know. Maybe I'm a little bit serious, so I'm trying to cope with you. But maybe first of all, if you can define yourself, how would you like to define yourself for people maybe first time listening to you?
Well, it's hard. I've studied physics.
Yeah.
I'm a science and tech enthusiast, you could say. I was a stand-up comedian, and now I'm a science communicator that still has some of the comedy genes. So I used to be a pure stand-up comedian, just talking about anything. Then after a while, I started talking about science because physics is and was my passion. Yeah. And then I noticed that there was a great demand for this, to talk about science in a much more informal and entertaining way, without being too, without making things too easy. I think the biggest mistake in science communication is underestimating the interest of the audience and just downplaying it too much, actually.
Yeah, that's a very important point. I think that's something we'll discuss in detail. But I would like to go back when you dropped out for school. It's a situation like that because sometimes if you're really passionate about something and you sometimes, many students sometimes feel they don't really gain this kind of knowledge sometimes, or feel sometimes, it's a kind of the way we make people passionate about something. Mm-hmm. So for you, back in this time when you take a decision to drop out and do something, what kind of thoughts come to you at this time, emotions to do something different?
So I was in my last year of physics when we started working for television. And so I paused. Back then I thought I paused my studies to make a TV show. And I was really convinced when I stopped then that I was going to be back. And there were two options. Either the TV career would just fail in the first year, which was very realistic, of course, but it's not a place where you're sure you're gonna have success or continue. And the other option was okay, I work on my comedy career for a while, and then kind of part-time I continue studying. I had high hopes for this because the system became a lot easier at that point. Suddenly you didn't have to do entire years. You could just do one course at a time. And actually, I think there's 5 courses that are still on my desk, have been there for the past 10 years, kind of hoping like maybe one day. It turns out I'm probably going to become this. When I studied physics, there were always a few retired people. And they were mostly retired engineers, actually, who suddenly, after their career, I think in business or in development or in machinery, wanted to find the pure poetry of theoretical physics, I think. Yeah. And so I'm probably going to become one of those.
But I'm curious about this combination for the comedy and the science, because you said that sometimes, the way we in academia, sometimes a lot of students miss out well. I don't know if you know Taylor. He's doing some chemistry videos on YouTube. Taylor, I don't know if you know him, but he was in the podcast, and I think this way, when I saw your videos, you have this kind of fun and combination with science. It's not easy. And when we speak in academia, for example, schools, there's a lot of seriousness, and people kids hate it. I think that's something, and that's something I think is not easy. It's hard. How we can, for you as a young maybe at this time, I don't know, 18, 19 at this time, how you figured out that I can use this comedy skills with science? How it's easy for you, hard?
I think I like to speak of myself as a nerd. I like to use it as kind of a thing that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
And I know other people really dislike the word, so that's up to anybody to use it or not. But I like to speak of myself as a nerd and the nerds. And I think nerds amongst each other, we have lots of fun. We have our science jokes and our math jokes, and we have Pi Day and the Ig Nobel Awards. When I let people watch the Ig Nobel Award ceremony for the first time, they always think these are not scientists. People who are outside of science, they think these are not scientists. The scientists are serious people, and they always have to be very self-contained, and there they see people just losing it and throwing paper airplanes and having fun. So I think there has always been passion in science and technology. I think few people choose this path without the passion to really do it. And for me, the link from passion to talking about it in a fun and entertaining way is kind of logical. What I think the pitfalls were in the past decades, and we're learning fast now, I think, because of internet and memes and the fact that people find each other and can make jokes and have fun. But I think one of the problems of the past decades, when things came to us through linear television and things like that, is that when you're really researching a topic, being very passionate about one result can become a bias. The fact that sometimes when you see a researcher, especially, of course, I think it's even a bigger danger in the human sciences. When you really want to prove something in society or in psychology, and you are so passionate about it, and you really want this to be true, that's always dangerous. Now, the charge of an electron will not be fooled by your enthusiasm, but things in society and psychology. So I think it's just a hypothesis that I've had for a while, that the seriousness and the objectiveness that we look for in research kind of spilled over to the way we communicated about it. That we thought we have to have the same rigidness. And you will often see that when you talk about science, that especially other scientists are very unforgiving about small mistakes that you make or about incompleteness. When you talk about a topic and you want to make it accessible for a broad audience, very often there are colleagues in the same field who come back, yes, but this little detail was not right, and you cannot call this phenomenon that name because actually it's something else. I've seen it a lot. So I'm not in the position myself. I think I have kind of a freedom by the fact that I'm not in research myself, that I'm not connected to an institution, that I don't have colleagues or competitors in the same field of research because I don't have one. But when I invite scientists to talk about what they are doing on television, they are mainly thinking about the 8 colleagues who will see them on TV and not about the few 100,000 people of the general audience. So they will shape their sentences in a way that the colleagues cannot criticize them afterwards, and not in a way that makes the few 100,000 people enthusiastic. And that's something that I think we're losing it now. I think people are learning. And I think the new generation, the people who grew up with podcasting, for example, and also with the clever comedians that we have internationally who talk about science too, with the Brian Coxes and Neil deGrasse Tysons, So I hope that things are changing now, and I see the signs.
It's a very excellent point and loaded point. I think that's something. Yeah, we speak a lot of time about that. The way of the communication with general public. Of course, there's like great research. We can't say that. But at the same time, something we discuss in academia, the pressure to publish for grants and funders. And of course, there's a lot of effort and pressure at the same time. But I think in between, I'm not speaking for everyone, but some people like you, or maybe people who are passionate, just want to be curious. Sometimes this is killed the curiosity because you want a certain result, or you're afraid of your competitor, what it's going to say about you. And that's, I don't know if that's what could be damaging at the end of the way, or that's something, the way we communicate with people or make people curious about what we do. But I'm curious to ask you that point, because I saw your interview with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he himself and also Carl Sagan, they have a lot of criticism. And even now, science communicators, they seen as not really science communicator. Mm-hmm. It's not taken seriously. Yeah. Although you're reaching many people, you have this effect to reach many people. You're not a researcher, but you're really curious about research and you're able to think critically. Yeah. But there's deep down underestimation for science communicator or not taken seriously. Why do you think this happened?
Well, it's a different profession than being a researcher, I think. Mm-hmm. The people who combine it have always been the best. I think Carl Sagan and Richard Feynman, for example, who could speak in such a... Well, when he talks about science, you become enthusiastic. Neil deGrasse Tyson also. The reason why science communicators get some criticism, there could be a few. If I'm very pessimistic, then I would say maybe it's kind of human psychology. Why is this person talking about this topic while I have more expertise in it? Exactly. It is something that I haven't experienced a lot personally, because I think I play it on the safe side, and I will downplay my own experience in things. When I explain something, I will often acknowledge that I've learned this from the expert. I've heard it from the expert. But that would be the pessimist side, that people get in this reflex like, I'm the expert, why is this person talking about it? Yeah, well, because talking about it is kind of an expertise too. If I'm less pessimistic, and let's go for that, then the expert will see the simplifications in your explanation, because that's kind of their job. When I have to explain to kids or younger people or a general audience what mass is, I will always connect it to weight. And so the correct way of explaining this would be, so this object has mass. This is something that on Earth, in the field of gravity, we can experience as weight. I don't need that sentence to talk to young people. I can say, so this object is mass, things that have a weight. I often get angry letters then, especially by secondary school teachers, because they have a hard time explaining their students the difference between the two. Yeah. And so out of their expertise, out of their experience, they say like, okay, so I spend a week time in my lessons to get them to see the difference between the concept of mass and weight. And then this half a comedian on TV uses them in one sentence and turns it the other way again. So I can understand why then people criticize you. But for me, it's a very deliberate choice to not use the complete sentence, this is mass, something that we experience here on Earth in the field of gravity, as weight, because that's not the way that I reach children or youngsters. So that's probably, I think that would be the two main reasons where the criticism comes from. And maybe one extra is that the first time I did science on TV was in a talk show here in Belgium. And I was a comedian at that point. So, of course, it was half comedy and half science. And I didn't use a lot of mathematics because it was in a broad audience talk show. I was just talking about the principles. How does a microwave work? How does a nuclear explosion work? I even did relativity and quantum. But for the microwave, I just took the example of the water molecule and the polar I think the English word is so the plus side and the minus side. Yeah, and the fact that in the electromagnetic wave it would turn around. And then there were some letters on, well, not only water is polar and other molecules in your food are too. It's like, okay, I didn't have time for it. But the point I was going to make, afterwards, the number of students starting the study of physics in Ghent doubled.
Yeah.
And in the second year, it fell back to normal.
Why?
Because, and that's something that I've always kept in the back of my head, because I've made people enthusiastic for a kind of science that is not something that is taught at university, and for good reasons.
Yeah.
You don't teach people at university the fun stories and the wow moments. I think there is nothing wrong with the wow moments, but the moment that people start focusing their studies on something that it is really not, then the criticism of science communication is absolutely valid. And so now the last book I've written about physics, which is just the wow moments, which is just, I tell people, I take you on a walk. This is a country that I've studied physics.
Yeah.
And there's some very nice corners here that I want you to see, and come along and we'll take a walk. But in the end, I just added a very important piece. Like, if you like this book, know that this is not university physics. I don't use math in my book. You cannot have the illusion. Well, I cannot give the people the illusion that they can do anything in physics without mathematics. But it's the language of it all. So the way I described it was, I took you on a fun ride in a nice car. In university, you have to learn to build the car. It's not because you like the ride that you want to be with your hands in the motor and the oil and the cylinders and everything. There's a conceptual difference between the fun in physics and the way to study it. So the best thing I can hope for is that I can make the people who do like the deep work a bit more enthusiastic, and that the others enjoy the ride and then just do something else. But that was, I think, one of the most valid criticisms that I've received for science communication. If you give people the illusion that this is the real thing that you're going to do in university, then there's a danger in there. There's actually few people who have started their studies in physics because of me, and it was really not something for them. So you sometimes have to be aware of these things as a communicator. Yeah.
But I don't know for the criticism. I think that's something you still face it. I think any sense communicator is still facing that. Honestly, how that's affecting you when you see that some people is still conservative. The way is not allowed to simplify. Even people with today, I think people, they just use simple words, and they say journal will not allow using simple words. It's just hard to understand. Even for myself now, when I not expert something, it's just so annoying to read it in very jargons. Like, I don't understand what you say. Why you don't make it simple for me? I don't understand. Why do you think education? I think that's a global problem. Why we keep these jargons? Why we don't use the simple language so people can relate? For example, and that's something we go for, the storytelling. It's hard to do storytelling. It's super hard. And I think it's a talent, that how you make a story that people can relate to it and make them enthusiastic.
I think that is something that is done very well in the new Cosmos series. Carl Sagan's wife, who is a writer, wrote this new Cosmos series that it was then hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson. But they really go for the story of the history of the things that we discovered and the people who discovered them. And that is something that has always appealed to the human psyche. That's why we have movies and theater pieces. And so I remember when I was really studying physics, I didn't really care about the stories. I thought the beauty of relativity and of quantum mechanics was more than enough for me. And then the stories and the discussions between Bohr and Einstein, they were nice, but they were not what I was after. But it's absolutely a good way to reach an audience. like Bill Bryson does in his books. A Brief History of Nearly Everything, I think, is a wonderful book that gives you this feel of it's a human endeavor, this science and finding things out. So in science communication, there is this storytelling and there is this simplifying. Where the criticism comes from is, different angles. One thing that I maybe think, because there's a lot of science communicator training at this moment. There's amazing things going on, like the Fame Lab, the international competition where you explain your topic. There's Bright Club, which is a comedy club for scientists. We had a few in Brussels. There's many in England. There's an evening of unnecessary detail. Is I think monthly in London, organized by the Festival of the Spoken Nerd. And that's a lot of fun, and people are amongst their own. It's a very safe environment, there's not going to be a lot of criticism. There's a huge enthusiasm for the very, very nerdy joke there. So those are great environments. One thing that when people want to go into science communication, I always advise them, go for those stages and just do it and learn by doing it. And there's a lot of experience that you can get there. But the last few years I've been thinking, if you make that next step in science communication and you start really reaching the audience, like in a podcast or even doing a small explanation on TV, people kind of need to be prepared for these few angry people with a smartphone who are always there. And it's such a small minority, the people who will actively take their telephone or their laptop to tell you how bad you did or how annoying you were. And the good news that I can tell people is you do get used to it. The bad news is took me 10 years. The first time somebody addresses you directly. I mean, when you do a podcast or when you're on TV, there's hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of people, sometimes tens of thousands of people watching. You cannot expect them all to like you. It's mathematically impossible. Yeah. The difference is that in these times, of course, they have the devices to tell you this in person, and they do. And so I've gotten used to it. Also, I try always to be very diplomatic and to find out, like, where does your frustration come from? The reason why I'm telling this now is that I've seen people nearly drop out of science communication simply because of this. I've seen people who were very good at what they did, good researchers who could talk about their research in an understandable way, in an entertaining way, and they did in some talk show where there was a politician, and the next day they had 3 emails about small mistakes they made and how annoying they were. And this, it's so small, but it really weighs on people. They, like, for a week they don't really know, like, do I want to continue doing this? Can I take this again? If I can do an explanation every month, can I take this every month? This kind of commentaries. And so when it comes to criticism, there's valid criticism that you can always learn from. And then there's these few annoying people that you can learn to ignore once you can see for yourself, like, this is going nowhere. This is somebody who's angry at something and I was in the picture. Yeah. But it's something to prepare for. Unfortunately, when you go into science communication, you have to be prepared for this in advance. Just don't let them drag you down. That's kind of the thing.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It happens. I think almost science communicator or podcaster, they have kind of hate, or they don't really agree with what you say. I don't understand why people hate something like that. But yeah, as you said, you can't let everyone like you. It's just impossible. Yeah. True. But I'm curious to ask you about when you go to stage and you have this comedy sense with science. Do you think it's something natural? I don't know, because we are, maybe I'm serious a little bit. So I don't know, for you, has this kind of sense of comedy. It's hard to you to, when you go to stage and make sure the audience is engaging with you. How do you make sure that you have this sense of comedy and making people laugh at some time, make this kind of science story? How is it easy or hard? Is it something anyone can be trained to do it? Or I'm curious about that. How you make sure you have this kind every time on stage, same performance?
I think it's a combination of the fact that you kind of there's some element natural in this, the fact that you want to do this, or the fact that you look for these situations, and then there's a lot of training. I think it's the same. It kind of compares to sports people. If you don't like to be on a grass field, you probably won't become a good football player, even if you have the talent for it. If you have a lot of talent and you like to have fun, but you don't like the training and the running and the power fitness, then you probably won't get there too. So it's kind of a combination. Also, like for everyone, my first shows were difficult. Almost every stand-up comedian that I know wanted to go home a minute before their first performance. It's the moment where it hits you like, why am I doing this again? Why am I putting myself in front of, I think then 60 people who can just be silent for the next 10 minutes and just, yawn and send me away? So that's a point that you have to cross. And then my first few shows, I was young, I was a student. They were in bars. There were 30 people there, 40 people there. Some of them didn't work at all. Sometimes nothing happened. And then you have to kind of analyze. And then you have to just learn. Stand-up comedy, I think, is kind of the... I don't know what the English word is. When these long-distance runners, they go training high in the mountains to kind of... the altitude training to increase their oxygen levels. I think stand-up comedy is the altitude training of public speaking. It's a ruthless environment. If people don't laugh, they don't laugh. And sometimes it's because of your jokes, and sometimes it's because this audience was looking for something else, but you cannot deny that it didn't work. That's maybe something else with theater. The audience can be silent, but 5 people can have loved it. That's very difficult in comedy. When the room is silent, there's seldomly 5 people who afterwards think, "Oh, this was great." So it's a ruthless environment. It's an altitude training in public speaking, and it gives you kind of a natural reflex to look for not only the joke but also the entertaining part. And for me, the entertaining part is not always a joke. It can also be the wow moment. I love the wow moment, and I also love the aha moment when you explain something and suddenly you realize, oh, that's why the color of the sun becomes more red when it goes down and the sky is blue, and you explain why. They have this wow moment. And so for me, the joke and the wow moment and the aha moment have the same value. It's always kind of, maybe a small dopamine shot for the audience. That it's something fun. And so I think stand-up comedy kind of gave me this reflex to always give this to the audience every now and then. So stand-up comedy as a altitude training. And then there's something else. There's kind of a very easy advice for everybody who wants to go in science communication. First of all, you don't have to be a stand-up comedian. There's lots of other ways to talk about science in a very appealing way without the stand-up comedy. That's just one genre. But what I often say to people is that the best thing you can do is talk to an audience like you are talking to some of your best friends in a bar or at a picnic or at a barbecue. Just imagine that a good friend of yours who has no knowledge of your field asks you a genuinely interested question. So like, I've heard you were working on this. That's fascinating. Tell me more about it. How would you talk to this person? In my experience, that's always the best way to talk to an audience. And I've noticed it a few times. I've been in these juries for science communication competitions every now and then. What often happens is that the people will have 2 or 3 minutes to talk about what they do, and then we can ask follow-up questions. Almost every single one of them speaks a lot better in the follow-up questions than in their time on stage, because they've prepared it, and they've written it down, and they've exercised it, and it had to be shorter than 3 minutes, so maybe take that sentence out, and it kind of loses the spontaneity. And then when you ask the follow-up questions, especially when you ask about the things they're really working on, then the enthusiasm bubbles up. And you're like, oh, nice of you to ask, because that's how it works and that's how it works. So trying to be as informal as possible is difficult, because you will be very nervous your first performances. Almost everyone is. But reaching this point where you can actually talk to an audience like you're talking to good friends who are interested in an informal setting, that's kind of the goal that I try to steer people towards most of the time.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe it goes about the story. For example, when you explain a moment, people can relate why this happened. We take everything for granted. For example, the metric system. I like it how you say that we are playing 20 feet. Well, doesn't make sense. And that's true. Yeah. And I think that's take a lot of maybe, to understand what's actually in our life is not making sense to people. So for you, how to make the story. The art of making a story is not easy, and connecting these puzzles so people can understand, because it's hard. Storytelling is hard. Mm-hmm. How you make sure this kind of you select the story, what something you think, the momentum, or maybe how this story can people resonate with. How you select that, how you make sure you make it in a story way. Even your book as well. I saw your books have kind of relatable Game of Thrones, the poshes. So I think that's something people create movies with something that's brilliant.
Yeah, for the insects, indeed, it was Game of Thrones and in the undergrowth, because, well, I have a lot of side tracks in my interests, and insects is one of them, and the way they behave is just, well, they are murderous and stealing, and it's game theory. Evolution is kind of game theory, and I think we're very lucky that we are a species that lived in groups for so long, that we developed morality and solidarity and things. There's none of that in insects, so that's kind of Game of Thrones in the bushes there. When I try to analyze the story build-up, it's almost always in hindsight. I don't really have the recipe, I think. I don't really have a recipe that I follow to build up to a story. By working with other people, I sometimes have seen like, oh, I would do it in a different way. And then I think the main thing that I discovered for myself is that many people forget to put the reveal of the story in the end. And I'm looking for an example now that sometimes you can explain how something works. I remember now. Yeah, I was in a TV show. I was explaining polarized light, and we had done this entire setup with. You can take the polarizing filter off a computer screen, and then it's just white. The information is still there, but the light is polarized in all directions. And then when you take the polarizing filter and you put it over the screen, or you make glasses out of it, you can see the screen while other people just see white. And so I have to explain polarization and how it works. And then I ended with the story like, okay, this was discovered in this year, that year. And the person who discovered it thought like, oh, this is not only polarizing light, it is also filtering light. So it is diminishing how bright it is. So maybe I can make sunglasses out of this. And he called them Polaroid. And that's when people connect something that they've known for so long with the thing that you've just explained. And then you get, oh, then you get, oh, that's how it works. And I've seen some people make the mistake of opening with Polaroid. Say, do you know Polaroid sunglasses? Let me explain to you where it comes from. It's another way of telling the story, but you lose this moment in the end. And maybe it's stand-up comedy reflex to always go for this effect in a way, to that you want your audience to go either haha or oh in a way. So putting the reveal in the end is maybe the one trick that I do use sometimes deliberately. And all the rest is, once again, sports metaphor. If a soccer player takes a free kick, they can know everything about aerodynamics. It's not gonna help them much. It's all in the experience. A soccer player has to just take 1,000 free kicks, and then the biological neural network will figure out through experience what the best way is to hit the ball. Few people think about the point of equilibrium when they ride a bicycle and the possible gyroscopic effects of their wheels. So I think theory in storytelling is difficult. I think training is the main thing there.
Yeah. I'm curious to ask you in that case, do you think there may be missing pieces when it comes to make audience attracted or maybe curious? I want to keep your attention. I think that's part of how you make TV show series. It's just, you need this kind of state of mind, people curious till the end. So do you think there's other pieces behind the story and you as a communicator and how people perceive you? Because sometimes I don't like this. There's a state between the person and the story. Do you think other pieces secret to make audience attracted?
There's few tricks. There's kind of an awareness of the audience, the fact that you feel when attention is dropping, and once again, the stand-up comedy background, it's something that really trained me in this. I think that as a stand-up comedian, seeing a part of your audience kind of doze off, it's deadly and it's very threatening. And so I think, because I'm a nervous person in nature, that when I feel a part of the audience is dozing off, that I kind of look for tricks to get them back. And is there a joke somewhere, or can I do something unexpected? I've also ruined shows this way. The fact that I became too eager to please and too eager to tell the next joke, while people were maybe waiting for content and understanding how things work. But actually, the podcast that we started in Dutch, every month we look at the science news of the month. We started it for the exact opposite reason of what my reflexes as a comedian were. So, as a comedian, and when I'm on TV talking about science, I always want to be very short and snappy and very digestible for a broad audience. And I kind of felt like there's a lot of things that I really think are beautiful that I want to explain, and I don't have the time for. So let's just start a podcast for the in-crowd, just for the people who really want to know. And we can talk about the Mars lander for 15 minutes, and we can talk about the fact that AI systems are now better at, a lot better at folding proteins virtually than human researchers are, and what the ramifications are for science and bioscience and AI, the usage of AI in these fields. And so we took the time and we just talked about it, and strangely enough, to our own surprise, many people really liked it, even the people that we completely didn't expect there. We thought, like, this is our little corner for the real science enthusiast. And the audience has become much broader now, in a way that I have to be careful to not make the same comedy mistake now. Sometimes now I'm in the podcast and I'm thinking like, oh, can we take this topic because the audience is broader than it used to be? No, they came because we really went in depth. So I really shouldn't change the tone now, because then maybe they lose their interest. So that was a very interesting point for me, that when I threw all my crowd pleasing tricks overboard and started the podcast with the real in-depth information, that people were still interested. So maybe sometimes I aim for the joke a bit too soon. Could be.
That's really brilliant point, and I think there are a lot of lessons here embedded in what you say. Thank you for sharing that. It's very important. And I think now you're doing a show about DNA and human genetics across Belgium and Netherlands. So if you could just about this kind of, you now have two sides. The TV, it's limited, and you found that people are eager and demanding for more in-depth. They want more. And that's interesting. So how do you go for a show when you go to deliver a show for example, DNA, and where people have to care about that, and the future was ethical sides. How you now combine these two worlds in a show for people? Because in the podcast, sometimes you don't see the people, just go but I can understand the element of audience is kind of making nervous that I wanted to bleed them. Yeah. And that's maybe how you combine now the both sides when you go for a show you have. Yeah.
I think I'm very lucky that I can start my theater shows, most of them, as keynote speeches. So every now and then I'm asked for an event, a company where a lot of people deliver their keynote speeches, and most of the times I am the entertaining talk in the end or just before the end. But like, for example, my next show is going to be about AI, about artificial intelligence. So I've done an AI keynote now 3 or 4 times. And then it's just 20, 30 minutes that I talk about things that have struck me in AI results and research in the past years. For example, this protein folding and the new language generating algorithms that are there now. And then it's of course, when you do a keynote at an event, academic or business, it's a completely different thing than talking to an audience that came to the theater, bought their tickets, had a drink before, had dinner before, expect an entertaining evening. So I can have this build up. I can just start by doing the keynotes, and then I can start by doing the tryouts. Tryouts are amazingly important when you want to develop a show for a big audience. You need, I think, 15 to 30 tryouts in advance, because sometimes something will look so good on paper and it completely doesn't work with the audience. And the other thing happens quite a lot too, that you think that a certain sentence or something that you're talking about is just kind of a filler between two topics, and then the audience just loves it. So tryouts are kind of the wind tunnel of your show. You can do your drawings on the computer, but once you put them in the wind tunnel, you see where the flaws are. And that's how I get there, I think. By you can really allow yourself to start at a very easy level, like keynote level, talking about things like I would in a pub to someone else when they're interested, and then kind of building up to the theater setting with the light and the music and the director who then tells me where to stand and things like that. The biggest danger in moving towards the really theater show is, again, dumbing it down. I have long discussions with the director because in the DNA show, I really want to explain what DNA does. So the basic explanation of this long string of letters, the base pairs, and this beautiful principle that every 3 letters are the code for one amino acid. And if you put a line of amino acids in a row, they fold together to a protein. And these are kind of the mini robots that do a lot of things in our cells and in our bodies. I really wanted it in there. And again, they told me like, no, just focus on the society things, and is police going to use DNA to solve crimes, and will everybody know their ancestry, and the medical things and designer babies. Just focus on the societal things that people can relate to. But in my experience, an audience feels so appreciated when you really explain them how it works, that it's an essential thing of a show now. And so the same for AI. This will be a bit of a challenge, but somewhere in this theater show, I do want to explain what the layers are, and the neural network, and the weights, and I hope to get to the point that if you combine all your layers and your weights, that in the end you have a mathematical formula that you can derive. And so the deriving the formula can tell you which way to go to make it more efficient. I hope to even get to that point, but that will be tricky. Yeah. But this moment of really explaining how it works, I've heard from people in the audience that said, we kind of mentally skipped that point. That's okay. Some people, when I start talking about amino acids and the letters, they're like, okay, just let him talk for 3-4 minutes, and then we get back to the society things. For me, that's fine. But fortunately, more people were very happy afterwards that they had this basic understanding of how 3 billion letters in a cell can determine the color of your eyes and the way you taste things and stuff like that. Yeah. So really explaining how it works, I think, makes an audience feel appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one. So since we're close to the end, I have a few questions for you. First one, what is your aspiration when it comes to, I think, based on what you mentioned, it seems very challenging what you do. You want to make sure you have a deep understanding, and you want to make it in a digestible way, and also explain the basics. So it's not easy. You want to, it's a hard work. For you, what is your aspiration to make sure that, it's a lot of responsibilities, and you have to make sure that you deliver the mission you believe in. So for you, what's your aspiration, or something is still hard to understand when it comes to, I think I have a lot of expertise, but maybe something is still hard to understand, or maybe something you want to develop more beyond what you have already did a successful career. So, but still a lot of aspiration, I think.
When it comes to the job that I do, I think it's one of the most beautiful in the world. Maybe professional athlete, I think, would have been great. That ship has sailed a long time ago. Astronaut would be brilliant. Yeah. I'm slightly claustrophobic, not for me. So this is wonderful because I can visit so many researchers and institutions and get the explanation there. And I have the huge luxury of professionally choosing a new topic every few years that I really want to study. So from physics to genetics now and life sciences. And then the next step will be AI. And so I feel very, very blessed in that way. Yeah. I'm very happy with what I do now. I would like to continue doing it, but of course you always kind of think of, could there be a next step? That would be doing more in English, I think.
Yeah, that's something I was today I had a hard time to translate even what he's saying. Yeah.
The main reason is that, well, it's kind of a trade-off at this point. The fact that, for example, I tweet a lot. Yeah. I tweet mostly in Dutch. I sometimes tweet in English. My English tweets will get a lot less response. I don't know why, because I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of my Dutch-speaking followers will also understand English. Yeah. But I think that it's less call to action for them when it's not in their native language. So I've been thinking. I've done a show in English in at the Edinburgh Fringe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and for me that was kind of a point. Like, okay, now I have some content in English. I got some English-speaking followers from that festival. Thought like, oh, maybe now I can just switch to tweeting in English because all my followers understand it anyway. But immediately it was clear like this was going to do me more harm than good at that point. So the question is, will there be a time where it is a good idea to switch? I don't know yet. But I would really love to take my science theatre shows to England. The plans were kind of there until this strange virus hit the world. There was a bit of a plan of I'm still pretty sure that if I do my This Month in Science podcast concept with the English-speaking science communicators that I've met the past years, that this would really work too. So I think that's probably my aspirations and taking it a bit broader than the Dutch-speaking region. Yeah.
That would be appreciated if you can do English content as well. So yeah. And I don't know if do you think in this journey, do you think ego is important for you because you have a lot of like just experiences with audience and trial, and do you think ego now is important for you?
Well, we all have a certain relationship with our ego, I think. The fact that you start doing stand-up, well, tells you that you go look for an audience. I have quite a lot of friends who are very funny, and I sometimes tell them like, get on stage because you're clever and you're surprising. But most of the time they just say like, no, I like to be entertaining amongst friends. I don't really feel the need to get on that stage, and that's of course something that is different with comedians. I think I'm lucky to be an anxious person, by which I mean that when people kind of address me on my behavior, I will often back down instead of putting my chest up and acting like I'm the bigger man and things like that. So that hopefully protects me from becoming a complete diva celebrity or something there. But yeah, of course, if you look for an audience, this is something that is in your psyche, and then I think the trick is to just stay connected with everyone, and especially with your audience. Do not have this relationship of I'm talking to you and you're listening to me now. That would be deadly, probably. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. And I'm curious what the thing makes you maybe happy or satisfied, make your energy up, because you have. Sometimes we have all the time criticism, people like us. So how do we make sure this kind of energy, because this job requires to have good energy and happy and satisfied. What makes you happy, satisfied, or have this kind of energy to do what you do?
I'm still figuring out, because I've hit the wall a few times of just doing too much. Also because once I start performing, I will tap into energy reserves automatically. I can be sometimes tired or a bit ill before a show and feel great after the show because I've opened up a small reserve of energy somewhere. That's more a danger than a luxury, because you will always pay that back a few days later. And I've had periods where I've done too much in a short time. The things that the things that I have to be very aware of is that when I'm in a talking situation, I talk too much and too energetic, and then of course in a show that's what I'm there for. I'm on stage and I'm talking, but in social conversation I always have to be aware, like, don't get into performance modes. And I have a few good friends who can tell me this directly. So the people who know me enough to and that I trust enough to just tell me, like, Lieven, we're just here around a fire having fun. don't get in performance mode, and they're always right, because it's more instinctive than rational. It's just a reflex. And afterwards, I will feel exhausted. I will have been talking too much, and the others probably thought like, oh, this was a conversation, and now it's a performance. Let's not do this. Yeah. So that's something that you have to be aware of. It's an instinctive entertainment reflex, I think. Like, conversation is going down. Oh, let's find something fun or engaging to talk about, and that can drain my energy every now and then. Yes. But now especially the new lockdown, it's family time for me, and it's absolutely great. And I'm cleaning my house, and so that is a lot of fun. Yeah. And then maybe the things that really give you most satisfaction of the job is other people who got inspired, and then especially other people who got inspired and are doing amazing fieldwork now. Like you said, I've stopped my studies in physics because we had a golden opportunity to do a TV show at that point. So I've never done the real research and the real innovation in science and things like that. And I think it happened two or three times now in my career that somebody came to me and said like, I've just finished my PhD and I've started because of your little books. And then I can think, I haven't done anything myself, but I've started a few people on the way who did the actual work. And I think that's the most satisfying part of it.
I can imagine that. That's really wonderful. Yeah.
It's like the father who always wanted to be a writer and failed, and then the children have to do it because he couldn't.
Yeah, it's really wonderful feeling to have it. Yeah. Two last questions. The first one: what could be the most important quality? One important quality you have to maintain in your career. What could be one important quality?
That's difficult. One important quality as a science communicator. Well, maybe it's just to stay very interested yourself, and maybe not just interested, intrigued. Something that Feynman in one of his interviews also said, that when people say you take the beauty out of things with all your scientific analyzing, and Feynman said, what? And Feynman said, I look at a flower and I see 15 layers of beauty, from the ecological side to even the quantum side that makes this iridescent colors in the leaves. And even just the aesthetics of it is also there. But that's something that I couldn't agree more on with Feynman then, is that I think science really adds to the beauty, and so it's more than interested, it's intrigued, and to keep this alive in yourself is probably essential to also communicate it to others. Yeah.
Wonderful hearing that. Yeah. And what could be the best advice was given to you, and was the life changing? Advice was given to you, and was the life changing?
It's probably not really advice, but the fact that my parents said okay when I stopped studying is something that I was, as you are at 20 years old, completely unaware of at that point. But so basically they had paid university for 4 years, and then their strange comedy playing son said like, thanks for all the fish, thanks for 4 years of paying the housing and the food and the university and the research, but now I'm gonna try some very risky TV project with my friends. And the fact that at that point they said okay is something that I now that I've kids myself, that I kind of learned to appreciate now. yeah. And of course, the risk was not too high because my dad was convinced, like, let's grant him this small adventure, and then a year later he'll be back. He'll be back at university. But luckily it didn't happen, and he doesn't mind anymore.
That's great that you have a parent like that. So
Yeah,
you're lucky.
yeah. I feel very blessed in many ways.
Yeah, wonderful. I don't know if you have any final words before we close. Do you have any final words you'd like to say?
Well, I've listened to other episodes of the podcast.
I assume it's boring because you're
No, not at all. I'm an interested person in a lot, and I was, for example, I was kind of intrigued by the which is logical, but I didn't know the high amount of material science in soft robotics, because you don't really use the off-the-shelf aluminum parts. So there's a lot going in there, and so I've listened to a few episodes of the podcast. I'm quite honored to be amongst.
Yeah, it's okay. No, I think it's the honor for us because I think you have a lot of expertise, so it's fun and it's learning process to be like you. So I think to be a comedian. So.
Well, I do my thing in communication, but so the fact that I'm here amongst the real researchers who are figuring out the details and who are putting in the real work is great, and if there's any advice that I can give them for science communication, if they want to go into that, my pleasure, anytime. Yeah.
Again, it was a pleasure to listen to you, inspiring, and I think everyone knows you're in Belgium and Netherlands. So I think even beyond that. So thanks so much, and we expect English content as well. So that's something, a podcast in English. So
let's agree on that. Very big but if my English spoken content really kicks off in the next years, it started here.
Thanks so much, Lieven. Such an honor to talk to you.
Such a pleasure.